Ask the Coach 14 with Nick Sellers. How you doing, Nick?
I'm very well, thank you, Andrew. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. I'm well. Looking forward to the weekend, and the weather's nice, so
Yeah,
hopefully it stays
yeah.
that way.
Always makes us smile, doesn't it, when the weather when the sun shines.
Definitely. Yeah. Nick, on LinkedIn recently, I've noticed a surge in conversations about career pivots. It seems like many professionals are feeling restless in their current roles, especially with some industries facing challenges. And I'm curious to get your perspective on the trend. Is a career pivot always the right answer when things get tough? And if people decide to look at that route, how can they navigate that decision thoughtfully?
Good question. Things sometimes take on a kind of a fashionable trend, especially when in the media, in social networks and so forth, there's a lot of talk about things, and I'm not talking necessarily about conversation, but when, bloggers and writers and thought leaders talk about topics, then they kind of take on oh, I must go and do that kind of thing, a bit like dress sense and stuff like that. What's in fashion? I think we do have to, consider whether the role that we're in, the industry that we're in, is the right one for us. And we've talked in the past about aligning our goals in business with our personal values, because when those are not aligned, then there's friction, and that friction can be quite troubling. I think similarly, when we're in an industry, we might be in a role that's fine for us. It might be that the industry isn't fine for us, or it might be that the industry's okay, but the role isn't, or it might be that there is something that we are just really passionate about that we want to pursue. So I don't think there's anything wrong with considering pivoting career, going off in a different direction. But I think there's a lot of considerations that we do well to take account of before we pull the trigger on that.
What are those key considerations, Nick?
Key considerations are, I think, if you have family that you're supporting, what stage of your career you're at, because you might be in a very senior role, and actually, when you move from being very senior in a settled position, you move from a very solid financial and experience and career position to one which actually kind of moves you back onto more shaky ground. It's kind of like those stages of competence we've talked about before, that you might go from unconscious competence, where you're very, very settled and expert at what you do. You may step back a level or two by taking that change. And so you've got a whole learning to go through again before you can kind of reach that unconscious competence.
Mm-hmm. I've always said, Nick, and I don't know how you feel about this, I've said that the biggest risk is sometimes doing nothing. And the reason for that and the feel is that if you do see the writings on the wall, so currently we've had this discussion, a few weeks back about AI. I think if you see that your role is going to get displaced or significantly changed, you shouldn't be blind to that. And a risk there would be just to sit it out and wait and see what happens. You should be proactive and potentially look at that pivot before that pivot's brought upon you. What's your thoughts on that?
No, I agree with you. I think, and we sometimes think in very absolute terms, either this or that. So when we talk about something like riding things out, that's kind of one option that's available to you. But the other option that's available is maybe, right, I'm going to stop this and I'm going to go do that new thing. But somewhere in the middle of that lies an opportunity to remain where you know that you are safe and secure for now, whilst sampling something else. So if the changed career, if the new career that you've got in mind is to run something like an outdoor pursuits business or something like that, you love mountain biking, you love mountain climbing, you love all of that outdoor stuff, and you fancy running a business there, do you give up the big salary and the guaranteed bonuses and all of that to just go pursue that, or do you start to find your way into it? Maybe you can actually go start doing some volunteering. Maybe you can actually take a stake in a business that's already there, so that you start to figure out, what you need to know more before you decide that that's now your new direction. So we can actually kind of take small steps or baby steps or safe steps towards where we think we want to go, try it out more, and then we make an informed decision if that's going to be for us.
Yeah, great advice, Nick. I think you're absolutely right. Nothing should be absolute. Well, not immediately anyway. And
Yeah.
we can dip our toes in the water before making that jump. But I think we've all woken up in the morning some days and things have been frustrating, and we've thought, give it all up to buy a vineyard in France and live the good life. But if we have that desire, how do we know if it's a temporary frustration we have in our current career or a deeper need for a new direction?
That's a really good question. I think frustrations come along all through life, not just with work, but with circumstances, personal circumstances, how we're feeling about things, how others are actually interacting with us, and everything. And we do need to take stock of whether that's something that is temporary and manageable, and even understanding ourselves better as to how we could deal with that better, or whether this is now a trait, a trend, something that we're either going to have to decide that we live with or change because we don't want to live with it. So, I guess where I go with that is if there's friction in a relationship, is that friction based on some current circumstances? And it may be that those circumstances are ones I've caused, or based on circumstances that somebody else is going through. And so we can then kind of determine what's the best course of action that I can take in this circumstance. But if it's that the friction is persistent, continual, and actually sometimes extreme, it may be that we decide we're going to step away from that for a time or step away from it permanently. So yeah, I think those frustrations, we've got to determine, like, is it just a point in time? Do I need a holiday? Or am I just back from holiday and I'm having to wade through extra work to catch up? Those kind of frustrations, or is it actually, something this just doesn't do it for me anymore?
Absolutely. Thing I notice quite often when I'm speaking to people who are frustrated in their job search is they have a lot more transferable skills and experience than they give themselves credit for.
Oh yeah.
So how, Nick, can people identify what their transferable skills are and how they might be valuable in a new field if they do decide to look at pivoting?
I think taking a piece of paper, and again, we've talked about this before, taking a clean sheet of paper and writing things down in two columns, the skills I have and the skills I lack would be one way. Just like it's like pros and cons, what's good about the situation I'm in, what's bad about the situation. I like drawing lists of comparisons. So when it comes to skills, I've got these skills. The next stage from that would be to say, now, where could those skills be used? So you may be, let's say, an accountant working in industry in a commercial situation. Could your accountancy qualifications and skills and knowledge be used in a different place? Either working for yourself where you get a portfolio of clients that you work for, or working in not for profit, or working somewhere else, somewhere that you actually feel as though you're doing some good. So take account of that, and also figure, are there skills that if I added them into where I am, so if you look down your lacking skills column, are there new skills that you could develop that would be interesting for you to develop and acquire that you could actually insert back into the place that you already are? So it's kind of a personal growth thing in that case without taking the risk of changing direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one thing I tell people to do is if they are looking to make a slight pivot, not an absolute pivot, then go and look at the job specifications for the roles that you're looking to do. And quite often there will be some technical skills in those areas that you can develop. And I do think these days it's very easy to go and develop new technical skills just with the
Yeah.
abundance of online learning and the abundance of courses, and it's fairly cheap as well to develop most skills in most areas. So I think there is a lot of options open to people who are frustrated. But another key thing I think, Nick, and I don't know how you feel about this, is a big value is to leverage your existing network and connections to gain insights into different industries and roles. How would you recommend someone could go about doing that?
Absolutely. In fact, we probably all of us know somebody who we used to work with who's moved into another role, another company, another sector, anything. They may have changed country, gone to work on the other side of the world. You mentioned a vineyard in France. So it could be for somebody, somebody who's already done something like that, moved to another country or gone to South America where grape growing is big and wine production is big. Talk to them. Excuse me. Just reach out to them and just say, could we have a conversation? The worst thing they could do is say no. And you never know, that conversation, if it takes place, could both inform and ignite a new interest in terms of where to go take a look.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely agree, Nick. I think people forget, there's a lot of goodwill out there, and people will tend to help if you ask a lot of the time.
Yeah.
So what would you say some of the common challenges people face when making a career pivot, and how could they overcome these challenges?
I think the challenges probably come from not being realistic. And maybe it's more real. It's a lack of realism around the challenges, the hardships that are going to be faced. So we've used this example of somebody that's got, the big salary, the bonuses, the career, the comfort of working for a corporation, and then they up sticks and go and do something else. Sometimes we can be a bit idealistic about how we're going to build that business up, or what the role is going to entail. It could be that we move from a cozy kind of city centre job to one where we've actually got to move around more than we ever thought we would have to. Or it may be that, whereas we've got pretty much guaranteed bonuses now, the bonuses where we go are not as guaranteed. So I think we've got to be realistic about the risks that we face when we make that change. But that doesn't mean to say that we don't take risks. I think part of life is that we've got to be prepared to take risks. It's just the magnitude of risk and whether that risk affects just us or affects other people around us. And are we prepared to pay that price? I think that's the big question. Are we prepared to pay the price for what we're about to do?
Yeah. It's like that program that I can never know if you've watched it before. I think it was when families go over and they spend 2 weeks living in a new country that they've always wanted to work in, and they explore. I think it's A Place Abroad or something it's called.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because the whole show's really about them evaluating their risks in their life, work security, proximity of family and friends,
Right.
and all these things. Then they have to weigh all that up, and then at the end of the show, they make the decision did they make the move or not, and then quite often they follow up with a year later how they're getting on. But that's a major life pivot. But yeah, a risk's not a bad thing. You just have to evaluate them properly, I think. So obviously, there's going to be, if you've been in a position for 20 years, Nick, you're going to have had career progression in all likelihood and built up a wealth of knowledge and experience in that area. If you pivot to a new area, obviously you're going to be set back in terms of your experience. How should individuals approach that timeline and potential setbacks associated if they do make a pivot?
I think having a good network around you, a good support network is important, because you are going to face things that you either didn't bank on or you didn't expect, or that turn out to be more severe than you expected. It could be that the help of the support network is actually going to kind of boost your prospects as well. That if that support is available in terms of people introducing you to folks in their network in the area that you want to go to, that's really key. I think, figure out how important things like money is to you. If you're going to go make that change, you might want to build up some cash to keep you going for 6 months or more, so that you've kind of got that time to get the wheels turning where you want to go. It could be that the hardships. I keep using the word hardships, but I think we've got to be realistic that some of this is going to be hard. That the things that we face, we can predict and we can decide whether it's important that we're ready for it or whether we're just going to go with the flow when it arrives.
Absolutely. I think another thing that coming on the horizon a lot more is the gig economy. And I think we've discussed this in previous episodes where potentially in the future it won't be such that people do one full-time job. They may do 2 or 3 gigs. And I do think if you are exploring new opportunities, as you've mentioned earlier in the conversation, go and gain some experience in a new area, and there's a lot more availability than there's ever been to gain that experience. So I do think, as you say, don't make that change absolute, dip your toe in the water and explore, but there's more opportunity to do that now than
Yeah.
ever.
No, absolutely, and there's been a rise of this kind of notion of fractional executives. That whether it's marketing or whether it's operations or however it goes, companies don't need to take on a full-time person for a role. They can actually hire somebody who has 4 or 5 different roles that they fulfill. So this might be an opportunity for somebody that's pivoting career that, they may well be an accountant. Could they actually go become a fractional CFO or a fraction whatever for a not-for-profit?
Mm.
And so there's opportunities for us to use these new kind of working practices, these improved or changed working practices to our advantage. Maybe gives us that opportunity. The acceptance of people working part-time seems to be better now. So in my previous career, increasingly colleagues were starting to work 4 days a week or 9 days out of 10, that kind of thing. So they were actually kind of booking more time off to do things that they preferred to do. So it meant that they still had the steady income, they were still contributing to the business, but they gave them time to pursue either a passion or go test out a new career.
Absolutely. Yes, spoke to an accountant this week and she's looking for a part-time job, 3 days a week, and 2 days a week she's going to teach aqua aerobics. She said I wasn't sure whether I should tell you this or not. I said, fantastic, what a brilliant thing to go and do. And,
Right.
combine your passion with making a little bit of money, and I'm sure you'll be happier for it.
Yeah.
I think one thing as well, Nick, I've noticed is quite often people join a graduate scheme, maybe within professional services as an accountant or a finance professional or a lawyer, some of these jobs, and it's a tough gig.
Yeah.
And they think that I don't want to be a lawyer, I don't want to be an accountant after working in that professional services environment. And actually, what they've had is a very narrow experience of what their profession can offer. So they decide it's not for them at a point and they decide to pivot completely away. And in that instance, I don't know your advice, but I would always advise go and explore other opportunities in your field. You've gained that professional qualification, you've gained that experience. You may go to another organisation and have a completely different experience. If you
Right.
step away from that completely, you're giving up on a lot of study and a lot of hard work to get to where you've got to. What would your advice be to somebody in that position?
I think your advice is sound. I think go try things out. Whether we like it or not, we become institutionalized where we are if we're not careful. We actually think that the way that business that we work in operates is all there is. That's the way every business operates. We start to think that the restrictions and opportunities that are available in that role, in that business, are typical of others. Well, that's not so. There are in the UK alone, I think there's 5.5 million different businesses, and they will all have their own individual character, culture, and so forth. And we won't know until we go try out others. This is a bit like somebody saying they don't like a particular type of food, and then you find out that actually they never tried it,
Hmm.
or they've tried it once and had a bad experience, and so they think that all food of that kind is going to give them a similar bad experience. Well, we've got to go test that. We've got to go put to the test the things that we believe.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think if I was to think back in my career at the start, there's lots of recruitment companies that are very, very heavy on KPIs, especially maybe not so much these days, but 20 years ago when I was starting out and they'd make people do, 100 sales phone calls a day. Luckily, I didn't know about this at the time. Luckily, I went to a company that didn't make people do that. But I think had I gone to a company where you were just getting shouted at for not making 100 calls a day, I probably would have said, right, recruitment's not for me.
Yeah.
But you get a very different experience in a different company, and then almost 20 years later, I'm still working in that area. So it is, I think, well worthwhile exploring other companies within your field, other parallel jobs within your field before making a complete pivot.
Yeah. It takes courage, Andrew, to pivot career. It takes courage to actually even stay in the same role that you're in, but for a different company. And so, hats off to anybody who makes a change. It takes courage to do that. Sometimes that change is forced on us. Sometimes we make the decision, but otherwise, it takes courage. Celebrate that. I think just in view of what you just said, I think it also takes courage to not follow the established pattern. And, this kind of, make 100 calls a day thing, it sounds to me like it's production line stuff. You don't have to have a passion to do it. You don't have to do anything except just meet the numbers. And the expectation is that if you make 100 calls a day, you're going to generate so much revenue, and that'll actually satisfy all the numbers, the metrics that everybody's looking for. But it ignores relationship. It ignores the very thing that actually might be what feeds your soul, that you can actually have meaningful conversations with people who come to trust you and actually become very valuable clients. So, we've got to be courageous sometimes to actually say, that isn't the style for me. This is the style I prefer. And that's a form of pivot as well.
Absolutely, no, I agree, Nick. Great advice. Last bit of advice I was looking for you, Nick. So if somebody decides they've explored all options in their current career path, in their current field, but a pivot is absolutely for them, where do they start? Like, just talk us through the steps that you would work with a coaching client if they landed at this point.
So my question back to you is, have they decided what it is they want to do, or are they still undecided about that?
So if they're still undecided about what they want to do, what would your guidance be?
Okay, first things first, don't give up what you're doing until you know for sure what you want to do. So, don't just out of frustration go and, send in a letter of resignation and do that unless you're absolutely convinced that you've got no other option than to do that. So don't make it a knee-jerk thing, make it a considered, thought-through decision. And then I would say, if you are in a job, you've got space, opportunity to go and explore, because the things that look bright and shiny to us now may have a dark underside that we discover. So I would say, while you're in a job, if it means, going off and doing something else during your vacation days, or if it means kind of negotiating, moving down to 4 days a week where you are now to give you some space to go and investigate other options, that for me would be the logical, sensible thing to do. Now, that's not going to suit everybody. We're all different. Some people just want to make the change. And that comes with potential risks. The method I was talking about kind of de-risks it a little bit, in the sense that you kind of get to know and make an informed decision over time. But for some, they just want to decide and move on. If they're going to do that, just sit down and assess what the risks are for you. It's not just the financial risk of kind of suddenly going from a salary to nothing. It's the risk of relationships. It's the risk of so many other things. Just think it through and then decide what you're going to do.
I think you made a good point just at the end there, that you do need to consult with the people around about you, such as your spouse, because if you don't have the support to make those decisions, it's a lot harder. I would suggest. Becoming self-employed, very tough decision, but you need, I would say, the support of those around about you to be truly successful. And if you're not, you're fighting an uphill battle. And I would say it'd be very similar if you were to career pivot.
And you raise an interesting point there about having the support of somebody close to you. We've got lots of people in our lives, friends, family, relatives, people that depend on us, people that we depend on, and so forth. Are we expecting those people that we depend on to be a safety net for us? have we actually discussed that with them? So I've decided that I'm going to give up my job and go off, and then we end up coming back, say, to the bank of mum and dad when that kind of all doesn't work out too well. Are they happy about that, or are we just relying on the fact that they love us and will bail us out no matter what? Because that can strain relationships and so forth. But I think just understanding, like it's like when we drop a pebble into a still pond, there's ripples that go out from that, and those ripples can go quite far. So just thinking that part through, and also, sometimes the friends we've got are a bit like pals who they've got no vested interest in what we do. They're actually just going to say, yeah, yeah, go on, have at it, but they're not really that caring about the outcome. So, we just, I don't know, take stock of things.
Absolutely. Great advice as ever, Nick, and such a relevant topic at the moment. And I'm sure there's a lot of people considering career pivots, and it's great to get your insight as always. And yeah, hopefully you'll join me again next week.
Absolutely, Andrew. I always enjoy the conversations, and the topics we talk about, I always feel are extremely relevant, extremely current. And if this helps people, that are listening, just to think a little bit longer about something that they're looking to do or hoping to do or experiencing, I think that's a great return.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Nick.
Thanks, Andrew.
Bye.